Um, this understanding. What? This under, this understanding of the information system relevant to financial reporting should include relevant aspects of that system relating to information disclosed in the financial statements that is obtained from within or outside of the general and subsidiary ledgers. The auditor should obtain an understanding of how the entity communicates financial reporting roles and responsibilities in significant matters relating to financial support reporting, including communications between management and those charged with governance and external communications, such as those with regulatory authorities. Control activities relevant to the audit. The auditor should obtain an understanding of control activities relevant to the audit, which are those control activities the auditor judges it necessary to understand in order to assess the risks of material misstatement at the assertion level and design further audit procedures responsive to assessed risks. An audit does not require an understanding of all the control activities related to each significant class of transactions, account balance, and disclosure in the financial statements or to every assertion relevant to them. However, the auditor should obtain an understanding of the process of reconciling detailed records to the general ledger for material account balances. In understanding the entity's control activities, the auditor should obtain an understanding of how the entity has responded to risks arising from IT monitoring of controls. The auditor should obtain an understanding of the major activities that the entity uses to monitor internal control over financial reporting, including those related to those control activities that relevant to the audit and how the entity initiates remedial actions to deficient. If the entity has an internal audit function, the auditor should obtain if the entity has an internal audit function, The auditor should obtain an understanding of the nature of the internal audit functions, responsibilities, how the internal audit function fits in the entity's organizational structure and the activities performed or to be performed. The auditor should obtain an understanding of the sources of the information used in the entity's monitoring activities and the basis upon which management considers the information to be sufficiently reliable for the purpose. Identifying and assessing the risks of material misstatement. To provide a basis for designing and performing further audit procedures, the auditor should identify and assess the risks of material misstatement at the financial statement level and the relevant assertion level for classes of transactions, account balances, and disclosures. For this purpose, the auditor should identify risks throughout the process of obtaining an understanding of the entity and its environment, including relevant controls. Including relevant controls that relate to the risks by considering the classes of transactions, account balances, and disclosures, including the quantitative and qualitative aspects of such disclosures in the financial statements. Assess the identified risks and evaluate whether they relate more pervasively to the financial statements as a whole and potentially affect many assertions. Relate the identified risks to what can go wrong at the relevant assertion level, taking account of relevant controls that the auditor intends to test, and consider the likelihood of misstatement, including the possibility of multiple misstatements. And whether the potential misstatement could result in a material misstatement. Risks that require special audit consideration as part of the risk assessment described in paragraph 26. The auditor should determine whether any of the risks identified are, in the auditor's professional judgment, a significant risk. In exercising this judgment, the auditor should exclude the effects of identified controls related to the risk. In exercising professional judgment about which risks are significant risks, the auditor should consider at least whether the risk is a risk of fraud, whether the risk is related to recent significant economic, accounting, or other developments, and therefore requires specific attention. The complexity of transactions, whether the risk involves significant transactions with related parties, the degree of subjectivity in the measurement of financial information related to the risk, especially those measurements involving a wide range of measurement uncertainty, and whether the risk involves significant unusual transactions. If the auditor has determined that a significant risk exists, the auditor should obtain an understanding of the entity's controls, including control activities, relevant to that risk, and based on that understanding, evaluate whether such control have been suitably designed and implemented to mitigate such risks. Risks for which substantive procedures alone do not provide sufficient appropriate audit evidence. In respect of some risks, the auditor may judge that it is not possible or practicable to obtain sufficient appropriate audit evidence only from substantive procedures. Such risks may relate to the inaccurate or incomplete recording of routine and significant classes of transactions or account balances, the characteristics of which often permit highly automated processing with little or no manual intervention. In such cases, the entity's controls over such risks are relevant to the audit, and the auditor should obtain an understanding of them. Revision of risk assessment. The auditor's assessment of the risks of material misstatement at the assertion level may change during the course of the audit as additional audit evidence is obtained. In circumstances in which the auditor obtains audit evidence from performing further audit procedures, or if new information is obtained, either of which is inconsistent with the audit evidence on which the auditor originally based the assessment. The auditor should revise the assessment and modify the further planned audit procedures accordingly. Documentation. The auditor should include in the audit documentation the discussion among the engagement team required by paragraph 11, the significant decisions reached, how and when the discussion occurred, and the audit team members who participated. Key elements of the understanding obtained regarding each of the aspects of the entity and its environment specified in paragraph 12, and each of the internal control components specified in paragraphs 15 to 25. The sources of information from which the understanding was obtained and the risk assessment procedures performed, identified and assessed risks of material misstatement at the financial statement level, and at the relevant assertion level as required by paragraph 26, and risks identified and related controls about which the auditor has obtained an understanding as a result of the requirements in paragraphs 28 to 31. Oh, man. 40 pages of application. 40! 40! What the heck? 40 pages. And then we have 10 pages of appendix. Appendix. And then another appendix. Risk assessment procedures and related activities. Obtaining an understanding of the entity and its environment, including the entity's internal control, referred to hereafter as an understanding of the entity, is a continuous dynamic process of gathering, updating, and analyzing information throughout the audit. The understanding of the entity establishes a frame of reference within which the auditor plans to audit and exercises professional judgment throughout the audit when, for example, assessing risks of material misstatement of the financial statements, determining materiality in accordance with Section 320 materiality in planning and performing an audit, considering the appropriateness of the selection and application of accounting policies and the adequacy of financial statement disclosures, identifying areas relating to amounts or disclosures in the financial statements for which special audit consideration may be necessary. For example, related party transactions or management's evaluation of the entity's ability to continue as a going concern, or when considering the business purpose of transactions, developing expectations for use when performing analytical procedures, responding to the assessed risks of material misstatement, including designing and performing further audit procedures to obtain sufficient appropriate audit evidence, and evaluating the sufficiency and appropriateness of audit evidence obtained, such as the appropriateness of assumptions and management's oral and written representations. Information obtained by performing risk assessment procedures and related activities Information obtained by performing risk assessment procedures and related activities may be used by the auditor as audit evidence to support assessments of the risks of material misstatement. In addition, the auditor may obtain audit evidence about classes of transactions, account balances, or disclosures, and relevant assertions, and about the operating effectiveness of controls, even though such procedures were not specifically planned as substantive procedures or tests of controls. The auditor also may choose to perform substantive procedures or tests of controls concurrently with risk assessment procedures because it is efficient to do so. The auditor is required to exercise professional judgment to determine the extent of the required understanding of the entity. The auditor's primary consideration is whether the understanding of the entity that has been obtained is sufficient to meet the objectives stated in this section. The depth of the overall understanding that is required by the auditor is less than that possessed by management in managing the entity. The risks to be assessed include both those due to fraud and those due to error, and both are covered by this section. However, the significance of fraud is such that further requirements and guidance are included in Section 240, Consideration of Fraud in a Financial Statement Audit, regarding risk assessment procedures and related activities to obtain information that is used to identify the risks of material misstatement due to fraud. Although the auditor is required to perform although the auditor is required Although the auditor is required to perform all the risk assessment procedures described in paragraph 6 in the course of obtaining the required understanding of the entity, the auditor is not required to perform all of them for each aspect of that understanding. Other procedures may be performed when the information to be obtained therefrom may be helpful in identifying risks of material misstatement. Examples of such procedures include the following. Reviewing information obtained from external sources such as trade and economic journals, reports by analysts, banks or rating agencies, or regulatory or financial publications. Making inquiries of the entity's external legal counsel or valuation specialist whom the entity has used. Inquiries of management and others within the entity. Much of the information obtained by the auditor's inquiries is obtained from management and those responsible for financial reporting. Information may also be obtained by the auditor through inquiries with the internal audit function if the entity has such a function and others within the entity. The auditor also may obtain information or a different perspective in identifying risks of material misstatement through inquiries of others within the entity and other employees with different levels of authority. For example, inquiries directed toward those charged with governance may help the auditor understand the environment in which the financial statements are prepared. Section 260 identifies the importance of effective two-way communication in assisting the auditor to obtain information from those charged with governance in this regard. Inquiries of employees involved in initiating, authorizing, processing, or recording complex or unusual transactions may help the auditor to evaluate the appropriateness of the selection and application of certain accounting policies. Inquiries directed toward in-house legal counsel may provide information about such matters as litigation, compliance with laws and regulations, knowledge of fraud or suspected fraud affecting the entity, warranties, post-sales obligations, arrangements such as joint ventures with business partners, and the meaning of contract terms. Inquiries directed toward marketing. Inquiries directed toward marketing. Or sales personnel may provide information about changes in the entity's marketing strategies, sales trends, or contractual arrangements with its customers. Inquiries directed to the risk management function or those performing such roles may provide information about operational and regulatory risks that may affect financial reporting. Inquiries directed to information systems personnel may provide information about system changes, system or control failures. Or other information system related risks. Because obtaining an understanding of the entity and its environment is a continual dynamic process, the auditor's inquiries may occur throughout the audit engagement. Inquiries of the internal audit function. If an entity has an internal audit function, inquiries of the appropriate individuals within the function may provide information that is useful to the external auditor in obtaining an understanding of the entity and its environment and in identifying and assessing risks of material misstatement at the financial statement and assertion levels. In performing its work, the internal audit function is likely to obtain insight into the entity's operations and business risks and may have findings based on its work, such as identified control deficiencies or risks that may provide valuable input into the external auditor's understanding of the entity. The external auditor's risks assessments or other aspects of the audit. The external auditor's inquiries, therefore, are made regardless of whether the external auditor expects to use the work of the internal audit function to modify the nature or timing or reduce the extent of audit procedures to be performed. Inquiries of particular relevance may be about matters the internal audit function has raised with those charged with governance and the outcomes of the function's own risk assessment process. If, based on responses to the external auditor's inquiries, it appears that there are findings that may be relevant to the entity's financial reporting and the audit, the external auditor may consider it appropriate to read related reports of the internal audit function. Examples of reports of the internal audit function that may be relevant include the function's strategy and planning documents and reports that have been prepared for management or those charged with governance, describing the findings of the internal audit function's examinations. In addition, in accordance with Section 240, if the internal audit function provides information to the external auditor regarding any actual, suspected, or alleged fraud, the auditor takes this into account in the external auditor's identification of risk of material misstatement due to fraud. Appropriate individuals within the internal audit function with whom inquiries are made are those who, in the external auditor's judgment, have the appropriate knowledge, experience, and authority, such as the chief internal audit executive, or, depending on the circumstances, other personnel within the function. The external auditor may also consider it appropriate to have periodic meetings with these individuals. Consideration specific to governmental entities. External auditors of governmental entities often have additional responsibilities with regard to internal control and compliance with applicable laws and regulations. Inquiries of appropriate individuals in the internal audit function can assist the external auditors in identifying the risk of material non-compliance with applicable laws and regulations and the risk of deficiencies in internal control over financial reporting. Analytical procedures. Analytical procedures performed as risk assessment procedures may identify aspects of the entity of which the auditor was unaware and may assist in assessing the risks of material misstatement in order to provide a basis for designing and implementing responses to the assessed risks. Analytical procedures performed as risk assessment procedures may include both financial and non-financial information. For example, the relationship between sales and square footage of selling space or volume of goods sold. Analytical procedures may enhance the auditor's understanding of the client's business and the significant transactions and events that have occurred since the prior audit, and also may help to identify the existence of unusual transactions or events and amounts, ratios, and trends that might indicate matters that have audit implications. Unusual or unexpected relationships that are identified may assist the auditor in identifying risks of material misstatement, especially risks of material misstatement due to fraud. However, when such analytical procedures use data aggregated at a high level, which may be the situation with analytical procedures performed as risk assessment procedures, the results of those analytical procedures provide only a broad initial indication about whether a material misstatement may exist. Accordingly, in such cases, consideration of other information that has been gathered when identifying the risks of material misstatement together with the results of such analytical procedures may assist the auditor in understanding and evaluating the results of the analytical procedures. Some smaller entities may not have interim or monthly financial information that can be used for purposes of analytical procedures. In these circumstances, although the auditor may be able to perform limited analytical procedures for purposes of planning the audit or obtain some information through inquiry, the auditor may need to plan to perform analytical procedures to identify and assess the risks of material misstatement when an early draft of the entity's financial statements is available. Observation and inspection. Observation and inspection may support inquiries of management and others, and also may provide information about the entity and its environment. Examples of such audit procedures include observation or inspection of the following: the entity's operations, documents such as business plans and strategies, records, and internal control manuals, reports prepared by management, such as quarterly management reports and interim financial statements, those charged with governance, such as minutes of board directors' meetings, and internal audit. The entity's premises and plant facilities. Information obtained in prior periods. The auditor's previous experience with the entity and audit procedures performed in previous audits may provide the auditor with information about such matters as past misstatements and whether they were corrected on a timely basis, the nature of the entity and its environment, and the entity's internal control, including deficiencies in internal control, Significant changes that the entity or its operations may have undergone since the prior financial period, which may assist the auditor in gaining a sufficient understanding of the entity to identify and assess risks of material misstatement. Those particular types of transactions and other events or account balances and related disclosures that, for example, due to their complexity, resulted in the auditor having difficulty in performing the necessary audit procedures. As part of the discussion among the engagement team required by paragraph 11, consideration of the disclosure requirements of the applicable financial reporting framework assists in identifying early in the audit where there may be risks of material misstatement related to disclosures. Examples of matters the engagement team may discuss include the following: changes in financial reporting requirements that may result in significant new or revised disclosures, changes in the entity's environment, financial condition, or activities that may result in significant new or revised disclosures, for example, a significant business combination in the period under audit, disclosures for which obtaining sufficient appropriate audit evidence may have been difficult in the past, disclosures for which disclosures about complex matters, including those involving significant management judgment regarding what information to disclose. Paragraph 10 requires the auditor to determine whether information obtained in prior periods remains relevant if the auditor intends to use that information for the purposes of the current audit. For example, changes in the control environment may affect the relevance of information obtained in the prior year. To determine whether changes have occurred that may affect the relevance of such information, the auditor may make inquiries and perform other appropriate audit procedures, such as walkthroughs of relevant systems. Discussion among the engagement team. The discussion among the engagement team about the susceptibility of the entity's financial statements to material misstatements, provides an opportunity for more experienced engagement team members, including the engagement partner, to share their insights based on their knowledge of the entity, allows the engagement team members to exchange information about the business risks to which the entity is subject. And about how and where the financial statements might be susceptible to material misstatement due to fraud or error. Assist the engagement team members to gain a better understanding of the potential for material misstatement of the financial statements in the specific areas assigned to them, and to understand how the results of the audit procedures that they perform may affect other aspects of the audit, including the decisions about the nature, timing, and extent of further audit procedures. Provides a basis upon which engagement team members communicate and share new information obtained throughout the audit that may affect the assessment of risks of material misstatement or the audit procedures performed to address these risks. This discussion may be held concurrently with the discussion among the engagement team that is required by Section 240 to discuss the susceptibility of the entity's financial statements to fraud. Section 240 further addresses the discussion among the engagement team about the risks of fraud. It is not always necessary or practical for the discussion to include all members in a single discussion, as in group audits, nor is it necessary for all the members of the engagement team to be informed of all the decisions reached in the discussion. The engagement partner may discuss matters with key members of the engagement team, including, if considered appropriate, those with specific skills or knowledge and those responsible for the audits of components, while delegating discussion with others. Taking account of the extent of communication considered necessary throughout the engagement team, a communications plan agreed by the engagement partner may be useful. Many small audits are carried out entirely by the engagement partner, who may be a sole practitioner. In such situations, it is the engagement partner who, having personally conducted the planning of the audit, such situations, it is the engagement partner who, having personally conducted the planning of the audit, would be responsible for considering the susceptibility of the entity's financial statements to material misstatement due to fraud or error. The required understand of the entity and its environment. Appendix A. Understanding the entity and its environment contains examples of matters that the auditor may consider in obtaining an understanding of the entity and its environment. Appendix B, Internal Control Components, contains a detailed explanation of the internal control components. The entity and its environment. Wait, this is week 4. Oh, come on. Why did I name it week 3? This is week 4. Gosh dang it. Stop. Stop, 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 stop. Stop. Next week we have 4. We get 500, 500, 500, 500, 500, 600, 700, 700. And that's all it goes up to, 700 something. Presentations. And we have all these. The entity and its environment. Industry, regulatory, and other external factors. Industry factors. Relevant industry factors include industry conditions such as the competitive environment, supplier and customer relationships, and technological developments. Examples of matters the auditor may consider include the market and competition, including demand, capacity, and price competition, cyclical or seasonal activity, Oh my goodness. I just realized I'm basically 5 chapters behind in my reading of in-governmental accounting because I haven't. We've covered 5 chapters of the textbook and I haven't read a single one of them yet. I also haven't read anything for intermediate accounting, but we're only on the 3rd chapter in that class, and a lot of the information I can just learn by attending the class. That's funny. And I did I did like 2 homework assignments for that class without even reading the textbook. I mean, I read the textbook to help me with I looked in the textbook to help me with the questions, but I didn't read the whole entire chapters. That was funny. Cyclical or seasonal activity, product, technology relating to the entity's products. Energy supply and cost. The industry in which the entity operates may give rise to specific risks of material misstatement. The industry in which the entity operates may give rise to specific risks of material misstatement arising from the nature of the business or the degree of regulation. For example, long-term contracts may involve significant estimates of revenues and expenses that give rise to risks of material misstatement. In such cases, it is important that the engagement team includes members with sufficient relevant knowledge and experience as required by Section 220 quality control for an engagement conducted in accordance with generally accepted auditing standards. Regulatory factors. Relevant regulatory factors. There are 164 paragraphs of this. Relevant regulatory factors include the regulatory environment. The regulatory environment encompasses among other matters, the applicable financial reporting framework and the legal and political environment. Examples of matters the auditor may consider include the following: accounting principles and industry-specific practices, regulatory framework for a regulated industry, including requirements for disclosures, laws and regulations that significantly affect the entity's operations, including direct supervisory activities, taxation, corporate and other government policies currently affecting the conduct of the entity's business, such as monetary, including foreign exchange controls, fiscal, financial incentives, for example, government aid programs and tariffs or trade restrictions policies. Environmental requirements affecting the industry and the entity's business. Section 250. Consideration of laws and regulations in an audit of financial statements includes some specific requirements related to the legal and regulatory framework applicable to the entity and the industry or sector in which the entity operates. Other external factors. Examples of other external factors affecting the entity that the auditor may consider include the general economic conditions, interest rates and availability of financing, and inflation or currency revaluation. Nature of the entity. An understanding of the nature of an entity enables the auditor to understand such matters as whether the entity has a complex structure, for example, with subsidiaries, whether the entity has a complex structure, for example, with subsidiaries or other components in multiple locations. Complex structures often introduce issues that may give rise to risks of material misstatement. Such issues may include whether goodwill, joint ventures, investments, or investments in entities formed to accomplish specific objectives are accounted for and disclosed appropriately. The ownership and relationships between owners and other people or entities. This understanding assists in determining whether related party transactions and balances have been appropriately identified, accounted for, and adequately disclosed in the financial statements. Section 550 related parties addresses the auditor's considerations relevant to related parties. Examples of matters that the auditor may consider when obtaining an understanding of the nature of the entity include business operations, such as the nature of revenue sources, products or services, and markets, including involvement in electronic commerce, such as internet sales and marketing activities. The conduct of operations, for example, stages and methods of production or activities exposed to environmental risks. Alliances, joint ventures, and outsourcing activities, geographic dispersion, and industry segmentation. The location of production facilities, warehouses, and offices, and the location and quantities of inventories, key customers, and important suppliers of goods and services. employment arrangements, including the existence of union contracts, pension, and other post-employment benefits, stock option or incentive bonus arrangements, and government regulation related to employment matters, research and development activities and expenditures, transactions with related parties, investments and investment activities such as planned or recently executed acquisitions or divestitures, investments and dispositions of securities and loans. Capital investment activities. Investments in non-consolidated entities, including partnerships, joint ventures, and investments in entities formed to accomplish specific objectives, financing and financing activities such as major subsidiaries and associated entities, including consolidated and non-consolidated structures, debt structure and related terms, including off-balance sheet financing arrangements and leasing arrangements, beneficial owners, local and foreign, and their business reputation and experience in related parties, the use of derivative financial instruments, financial reporting practices, such as accounting principles and industry-specific practices, including for industry-specific significant classes of transactions, account balances, and related disclosures in the financial statements. For example, loans and investments for banks or research and development for pharmaceuticals, revenue recognition, accounting for fair values, foreign currency assets, liabilities, and transactions, accounting for unusual or complex transactions, accounting for unusual or complex transactions, including those in controversial or emerging areas, for example, accounting for stock-based compensation. Significant changes in the entity from prior periods may give rise to or change risks of material misstatement. Entities formed to accomplish specific purpose.